Recording in progress.
Welcome, everyone. We still have a few more people joining, so we'll just wait another minute and then we will get started. Well, good morning, good afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. Thank you, everyone, for joining. My name is Todd Myers. I'm the Environmental Director at the Washington Policy Center, and I'm really pleased to have everyone here today for this program. We have other people who will be joining us. Thank you for joining on a Saturday. I want to talk a little bit about, before we get to our program, I want to set it up with a few things and talk a little bit about why what we're doing here today is so important, and sort of how exciting it is to be part of a program that is really on the cutting edge, I think, of solving environmental challenges, and your opportunity to be part of what is a revolution all over the world in creating technologies that solve some of our most difficult problems. The beauty of this is that we have people joining us not just from where I am in Washington State, but across the globe. And the reason is that environmental technologies are adaptable. They can be used anywhere, and it is successful no matter whether government institutions are strong or weak, or even where politics are very divisive like they are now in the United States. Environmental technology, conservation technology is a way to solve problems without Um, Somebody, we're going to fix the chat here. Anyway, it's a way to solve problems no matter what the political situation is. So I had the agenda up. I will go ahead and share the agenda once again for today. We have a lot to cover in a very short period of time. We're going to pack it all in. This is not the last step, though. After the event, for people who are interested, hopefully this is just the first step, we will follow up and provide more tools. But before we do that, I want to thank our sponsor and our supporters. DevStream supported as a sponsor of this event. Thank you so much to them. They are a leader in financing carbon reductions projects. And then American Conservation Coalition, Meliorate Partners, Republic N, and Wild Labs have also been critical in helping get the word out about this event and in their own work in promoting conservation technology and these types of solutions. So, like I said, before we get going, I want to talk a little bit about the opportunity that conservation technologies present for solving big environmental problems. And this is probably one of my favorite examples from across the globe. So in a number of villages in Africa, access to water is very difficult. And so in many places, they try to put pumps in. If they don't have a pump, what happens is that what you see here with the picture on the left, where typically women have to go to a river or stream, collect water, collect as much as they can, and then hike back to their village. The United Nations considers 1 kilometer to be accessible, so it's a little over half a mile. So imagine walking a kilometer, picking up as much water as you can, and then having to come back. And then what they have to do is that they have to boil that water to make sure it is safe to drink. And the result is that in many areas of Africa, there is deforestation. Cutting down trees to cook food and boil water is the #1 cause of deforestation in many places. Not only is it difficult to collect water, it's also difficult to make sure that it's safe to drink and environmentally harmful. So a group called E-Water Services put in pumps that were cloud connected. And the reason this is so important is that cloud connection can tell them whether the pump is working or not. About 40% of pumps that are put in either by NGOs or governments break within a year and a half. And then often these villages are left waiting for somebody to fix them because they don't have local expertise. But E-Water Services put them in with cloud connection, and they charge a very small fee, about a penny a day, to use the water. And they can do this again because there's cell phone service in many places across Africa and across the globe. And that provides a financial incentive for them to keep those pumps working. And what you see here in the picture on the right is a woman who puts a little fob up to the pump that unlocks it, and then she can use water. And the great thing is that about charging a small fee is that she only uses the water she needs and doesn't want to waste, because for every liter or gallon of water that she uses, she's paying. The other thing that they can do if they don't have access to water is buy plastic bags of water. But what then ends up happening is where do you put the plastic bags? If you don't have water, often you don't have access to trash. So in creating these internet connected water pumps, the technology is not very difficult, right? It's internet connection, it's people paying with their cell phones, but the results are really remarkable. So this is a live dashboard that E-Water Services has. And I pulled this down just a couple of days ago. And what you can see here is that they have now surpassed 1 billion liters of water served to more than 200,000 people in villages in 3 countries. Again, the technology is not very difficult. It is simply cloud connected. They actually use Amazon Web Services and people with cell phones paying. And the result is that, as you can see in the bottom right, 98% of the taps are working, because the minute the tap breaks, e-water services has a financial incentive and the money from the revenue to go and fix it immediately. So I tell this story just out the outset because it is a fantastic example of what can be done with very simple technology in very difficult circumstances. That's not only good for people, but it's good for the planet. That's the, I think, really exciting thing about environmental technology and conservation technology and what it offers. So I've written about a number of these stories in my book, Time to Think Small. You know, basically what my book is about is an effort to inspire people to look at these sorts of solutions, to think about problems that they are facing where government institutions or politics are in the way, and alternative ways to deal with the difficult environmental problems that are around the world, like I just talked about. And there's just some amazing stories of organizations. It's not just good for the planet, it's now good for getting a job. And so just recently, Salesforce interviewed a Rainforest Connection about what are the top skills if you want to get a job, a climate job, reducing the risks of climate change. And number one was data analysis and emerging technologies. So that's why I'm really pleased to have our first speaker, Carly Batiste, who is from Rainforest Connection. We could call this whole program How to Be Like Carly, because she is the science outreach coordinator at Rainforest Connection. Rainforest Connection builds and deploys scalable acoustic monitoring systems that work to halt illegal logging and poaching, and then also enable biodiversity measurement and monitoring. But as part of her work, the way I came across her first in the conservation tech space is that she developed the Conservation Tech Directory. And we have a link to it on our webpage with resources that we will send out. So not only has she created the definitive the directory of conservation technology, she now works in it every day. And so I will turn it over to Carly to talk about the work that can be done and what she's been doing with conservation tech. So Carly.
Great, thanks so much. Let me pull up my screen. It worked before, it will work again. Or it won't. Jesus. Sorry guys, this literally worked not 5 minutes ago. It's okay, I'll just go without pretending. It's fine.
You want it? I have it here.
We're all good. Well, I'll make it work.
Okay.
We're just gonna use. All right. Hi, so my name is Carly, and as Todd mentioned, I'm the science outreach coordinator at Rainforest Connection, and I'm also finishing up my PhD, which uses passive acoustic monitoring to survey lemurs in Madagascar. And yeah, I'll touch on the directory in a bit, but it's a really, really exciting time to be in biodiversity monitoring and involved with conservation tech because the field is just evolving so quickly, but it can often be difficult to keep up with what's going on, right? So just as a roadmap of what I'm going to touch on today, we'll talk about biodiversity loss, why conservation is important, the knowledge gaps that we have in biodiversity monitoring, how technology can fill those gaps, and then I'll just use RFCX kind of as a case study for turning technology into actionable insights. And these are the lemurs that I study, so had to include them. Lemurs are great. So as many of you probably already know, there is an ongoing biodiversity loss crisis. So globally around the world, we're seeing a huge decline in biodiversity, and this is due to a number of things, mostly human-induced, such as habitat loss, particularly deforestation, invasive species, poaching, pollution, human-induced climate change. And so this is what's causing this really rapid decrease in biodiversity levels. So you might be asking, well, why does that matter? Biodiversity underlies the functioning of ecosystems, which us humans are completely reliant on, right? Like the ecosystem services that we pull on, which many people don't kind of stop to realize, are really vast. Food, water, shelter, any kind of anything that you can think of probably has some sort of derived product from the environment. And ecosystem services also are important for our own tackling of the climate change that we are inducing, right? So forests are a really important carbon capture mechanism. And so conserving biodiversity enables these ecosystems to function efficiently. And there's even recent research that's come out that says that forests that are biodiversity rich are better at capturing carbon than forests that have low levels of biodiversity. So given all of that, we are left with a dilemma in that the biodiversity intactness index, which is basically kind of an indicator of how biodiversity is doing in a region, it's not great. And particularly in areas in the global south. So this is also particularly relevant to specific taxonomic groups. So there are, right, everyone loves the fuzzy, like megafauna, pandas, and elephants of the world. But it's actually in things like invertebrates and plants that are really, really endangered. And this gray section, these gray blocks here, that is when a species is data deficient, which means that we do not have the data to even say whether the species is endangered or not. So you can see that this gray section, it's pretty wide in a lot of areas, which is pretty startling because we want to know, right, where the most threatened species are so that we can allocate limited conservation effort and funding to those areas. So again, this is particularly in the global south, where we see a huge biodiversity rich area, particularly for threatened species. But on the contrary, the data that we have from species around the world is heavily skewed to the global north. So this map is from GBIF, or the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. It's one of the kind of most comprehensive data repositories of species occurrences around the world. And it's kind of a complete opposite to that where the most threatened species map, which is not good. That's a gap that we really need to be filling. So how do we monitor biodiversity at a global scale so that we fill those geographic and taxonomic gaps? Well, we can measure biodiversity in a number of different ways, right? So we can think of it in terms of ecosystems at a more macro scale, getting really micro, genetic diversity, the genetic diversity present within species, particular species that are in an area. So there's a number of different ways that we can measure this kind of all-encompassing term of biodiversity. And really, to get at each of those ways that you can measure biodiversity, there is technology working at all of those levels. So especially in the past couple of years, this technology has really taken off. Satellites particularly there's been a ton of recent satellite launches, and satellite data is getting increasingly affordable. You also have drones, that can be used to survey and collect aerial imagery. For example, in the marine space, this is being used a lot to kind of monitor marine mammals, for example, or even in forests, you can detect primate nests like chimpanzees and orangutans who make nests in trees. and that's a proxy for the actual species. And then for all the way on the ground or in the canopy, you have things like camera traps, motion triggered cameras, or thermal cameras. There are acoustic recorders, environmental DNA, which is basically using a sample of soil or water and pulling genetic information from that sample to determine what species have been present in that area. And then biologging devices that have GPS units attached to them, or accelerometers that can be used to measure behavior. So there's really this massive suite of different sensor technology that's super exciting. And there's a recent paper that I definitely recommend. It's a great overview of kind of all of these sensors that can be used in different ways. So like what I just talked about, we have like acoustic sensors, sonar, eDNA, cameras, different radars and LiDAR sensors. So super exciting. Excuse me. And really, it's truly innovating on like a daily basis. It's hard to even keep up. But what we're really trying to move beyond is just these sensors which collect data, but how do we turn that data into actual insights, into actionable insights that are digestible to anyone? Sorry, I have a slight cold. So because these sensor devices have become more affordable and accessible over the past couple of years, the bottleneck has really shifted from data collection to data analysis and storage. This is what's really important, right, for determining the things on the bottom row. So the traits and abundances and distributions, to really get a ecological perspective of what's going on in an ecosystem. This has been further kind of amplified by the big data revolution and the advent of machine learning and cloud computing. So this is that we can now take the data that we're getting from these sensors and put them into these very complex machine learning models, and they can be trained to detect particular species or sound. And so that is really efficiently turning the data into insights in a way that no amount of manual labeling could ever have done. So we're able to analyze terabytes of data now much more efficiently so that we can get this kind of global scale monitoring. And that's really what we're trying to work towards, right, is a global biodiversity monitoring network that has hubs in different regions where they're using observation technologies. It's being put into a shared cloud system so that it can be shared and used by practitioners and stakeholders from around the world. So it may seem incredibly overwhelming. And if you were like me a couple of years ago, I had no idea where to even start. But I decided to do something about that with my colleague, Grace Ermy. We co-created the Conservation Tech Directory, which I'll show you in just a minute. And then I'll also show you Wild Labs, which is an online global conservation tech community of over 6,000 people. So I will just flip my screen to show. So this is the Conservation Tech Directory. It's small. You can make it bigger. It is basically just a giant filterable, searchable list of all of the conservation tech things that Gracie and I could find and then continue to find. So it's updated every couple months. It's a community kind of focused directory. So if you find something that's not in this list, you can submit it and we'll add it in our next update. But it's basically a searchable list of all conservation tech things. So you can search by keywords, you can filter by country or resource type, if it's a company or a NGO, things like that. So that's a good place to get started. And then the other place is Wild Labs, which is a great community that also has a huge social media presence. So definitely follow them on like Twitter and LinkedIn. Use the hashtag Tech for Wildlife, hashtag. So there's discussion threads, there are resources and events calendar, all related to different conservation technologies. There are groups around particular technologies, so acoustic monitoring, AI for conservation, biologging, that kind of thing. So you can get involved in what you are most interested in. So let me switch back to the PowerPoint now. And I'll switch gears a bit to talk about RFCX. And I'm sorry that I'm going through this so incredibly quickly. Todd asked me to cover a lot, but I will share the slides with everyone, and feel free to reach out if you have questions. So Rainforest Connection is a nonprofit that's really focused on harnessing the power of sound and AI to protect and monitor rainforests and ecosystems around the world. So we are developing and leveraging conservation technology that uses sound and AI to protect these threatened ecosystems. And within this, we have two kind of main streams. So there is threat detection, which is what Rainforest Connection really originally started out as when it was first established. It was just with this, which that is running in real time. So you can load models, for example, for chainsaws or gun time, and send alerts to people on the ground. But RFCX, so this is how RFCX first kind of started, and then they merged together with the makers of Arbimon, which is a acoustic analysis software. And so now we've combined these two kind of solutions into one, and we've added biodiversity monitoring. So this is just, again, an overview of the Guardian system and the threat detection system. You deploy these up in the canopy. They are connected to the cloud so that you can send real-time alerts to people on the ground so that action can be taken if rangers need to be sent out or anything like that. And then biodiversity monitoring is mostly with our Arbimon software, which is a free platform, so anyone can use it. And you can use it to upload, store, and manage data, to run AI models and different algorithms to detect species and then generate ecological insights. So just as an example, our Arbimon started really as a way for us to generate the data and the insights needed for partner projects, but we realized that it was going to be really important to a lot of people potentially. And so that's why we're really excited to have it be an open resource, because we can now see the scale of it. So there are RFCX-led projects in 38 countries, but there are Arbimon user-led projects from 116, and collectively there's 111 million minutes of audio data with 3,400 species identified. There's 3,300 projects and even more users. So just beyond our RFCX-led projects, we're really able to scale our impact at the global scale that is necessary for biodiversity monitoring. And we're really kind of trying to make sure that we're making results actionable and interpretable by all. So we have a Arbimon Insights platform where your audio detections that can be automatically put into this dashboard that shows summary figures and maps that are really easy to interpret for anyone to take action on. So that is just a brief story of RFCX as an example of a conservation tech idea that became a project, that became a product, that became a open source solution. So the evolution of all of that is really exciting, and it's happening. I'm using RFCX and acoustics, but it's happening everywhere with camera traps, drones, eDNA, GPS tags. This trajectory is really being repeated over and over again. So feel free to reach out to me or search for anything that particularly sparks your interest in the directory, and I'll be in the chat if you have questions too. So thanks.
Well, thank you, Carly. We do have a question, and I want to invite people to ask questions that they may have now. Thank you for going over that so quickly. There's a lot to cover, obviously. Actually, I will just say that as I wrote my book, as I was editing it, I was listening to the live streams of jungles on the Rainforest Connection app, which was very relaxing and focused the mind. So, two questions. First, we have a question in the chat. Which basically is that that these technologies are really amazing. They open up new opportunities, but anything that can be used for good can be misused. And so how do we deal with that? I'm sure you've addressed this question many times.
Yeah, for sure. So it is definitely a huge concern, and particularly one of the papers I think that I sent you does a kind of good job of summarizing how to make the data owned by particularly local communities. So with RFCX, we're working with kind of like NGOs that are on the ground, and we have a really kind of diffuse data governance structure. So like we obviously would love for people to share data, but we want to do it in a way that is safe. So you want to make sure that, for example, you're maybe hiding location data for a particularly critically endangered species and not making that, publicly available. There are different kind of user levels that you can have in a lot of these softwares so that you can assign people certain access levels. And yeah, it's just as much of a problem in conservation as it is with any other kind of subfield, around the world, right? Any sort of tech can be used for bad, and I think it's innovating so rapidly that we need to be careful to be looking for those bad actors and accounting for those use cases. But it's difficult to do because the technology is moving so rapidly.
So I'll just add something real quickly, which is that I get this question on the energy side. I encourage people to use technologies to conserve energy, and people are worried about the misuse of the data. And I tell them two things. One, in the United States, and especially in the Western world, oftentimes the people you're concerned about misusing it are government agencies. And I tell them that the government agencies often have this data already or some way to collect it, and that technology is really more empowering people because and sort of catching up with organizations like that. And then the second thing is I have a friend who works in cybersecurity in the Pentagon, and I asked her this question about concerns about government misusing, and she laughed and she said, we can't even get our own internal organizations correctly to use data correctly, so going after everyone else is a little bit beyond us, which is, I don't know whether that's reassuring or disturbing, but anyway, but she said that they have enough challenges using the data that they do have. We have now some questions in the chat. One about from Doug. It says, do you have criteria for good or bad in the data collection? And is there an orientation class for the software?
If you're talking about for Arbimon specifically, yes, we have support documentation and video tutorials on the website you can check out. Most softwares do. So
A little bit there, Carly.
find the software
So just to clarify, Carly is joining us.
in the directory and go to the link, you'll one most used. I'll just turn my video off and hope that helps.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead and if you could repeat some of that answer.
Yeah, so yeah, sorry, my internet's bad. For Arbimon, we have video tutorials and support documentation online, and most of the softwares in the conservation tech directory do as well. So if you search for it in the directory and go to the link there, it'll give you what documentation is available. In terms of criteria for good or bad, that really depends on what your use case is. And yeah, good and bad is subjective depending on what you're trying to do. So it really varies depending on the use case.
We have another question from looks like Martin, who says we have data. We have data deficiencies in some places, but we have enough data in other places. And I think his general question is, how do you use that data? So talk a little bit about how Rainforest Connection is using the data to take action, especially in the global south, to prevent extinctions and to reduce the threat to wildlife.
Yeah, so I think in a lot of areas, we're missing a key kind of policy component that can be really variable depending on where you are. And even in places, like Europe and the US, where we do have the most data, we also don't have really high levels of biodiversity compared to a lot of the tropical areas. That's not to say, obviously, that we shouldn't conserve the environments in the global north, but I think there's a policy component and a kind of working with local communities component that needs to be better integrated into conservation. Because that's really where you see that things work, is when people who are living in and around an ecosystem kind of take pride in that ecosystem and have ownership over the data that's coming from it. That's where real success happens. And in terms of like an example from Rainforest Connection, in the UK even, we're using the Guardian system to detect invasive gray squirrels, and those real-time alerts are being used to kind of track the spread of gray squirrels and prevent them from expanding even further. So it allows for real-time intervention. And with the biodiversity monitoring, it can be really powerful if, for example, you see that after a particular conservation intervention like restoration or reforestation, that species richness or composition increases, which is what we've seen in projects in the Atlantic forest and in Borneo, in the Borneo Sabah region. Restoration sites are actually attracting and appear to be sustaining biodiversity levels similar to mature forests. And so that's a really exciting kind of affirmation that when we're doing things right, it is working.
Well, that's great. We have one last question where somebody says, are you looking for interns, and how can I get involved with Rainforest Connection? So just on our end, we will be doing a follow-up email to everyone to talk about what your interests are and what you would like to do for next steps. But specifically, Carly, how can they get involved in Rainforest Connection or learn more about your work?
Yeah, reach out to us. It would be the easiest thing. And just beyond Rainforest Connection too, if you post on Wild Labs, that's another really great way to get your name out there. Wild Labs also has a bunch of, like, lots of people post job listings and internship postings from conservation tech things on Wild Labs. So if you're following, and you'll see those posts come up, but also just feel free to post yourself, because that kind of connection making is that's how I got this job at RCX. Like, it wasn't even an advertised position. It was like, I obnoxiously just like got myself into conservation tech during COVID while I had nothing better to do. And like, just started showing up to lots of virtual events and posting in lots of channels. And like, eventually the directory came from that. Like, I connected with Gracie, we did the directory. All of that just kind of happened by shamelessly putting myself out there. So I would just, yeah, recommend that.
Well, thank you very much, Carly. That was fantastic. We have to give special thanks to Carly because she is in Italy. And so she is spending part of her Saturday evening in Italy with us, which gives you a sense of her commitment to this. So thank you so much. We really appreciate the time.
Thanks.
We have one last question that I saved because it is a perfect lead in to our next speaker. The question is, and this seems to come from a lot of NGOs, but how can regular citizens get involved? And our next speaker can tell exactly about how citizens are using technology to get involved. So Carolyn Nickerson is a senior program director at SciStarter. SciStarter is, I think, the world's largest hub for citizen science projects. If you want to engage in a citizen science project, go there. If you are thinking about creating a citizen science project, go there. It is really fantastic. She is a 2020 Master of Public Policy graduate from American University with a focus on environmental and climate change policy. And while at American University, she was the William K. Riley Environmental Policy Scholar. And you're now working on your PhD, is that correct? Yep. So
that's right.
She has a great explanation of citizen science. SciStarter is something that I've used a lot. And just to sort of give you a sense of her experience in this, I was asking her about her PowerPoint because it had so many slides, and she says, "Don't worry, I'll keep on time. I've done this presentation dozens of times." So she knows a lot about this, and I think will help answer the question of how citizens can get engaged directly rather than just through NGOs. So Carolyn, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, it's definitely been a month of events. It's been Citizen Science Month, as you can see from my Zoom background. So we've been doing online events, in-person events. We've just been getting out all over the world into the community and getting anybody and everybody to do real science with citizen science. So I'm just going to share my screen. It'll pop up in a second. There it is. So I also wanted to thank, since it is Citizen Science Month, Citizen Science Month was supported by the All of Us Research Program and the Network of the National Library of Medicine. So they're the ones who have supported my time to travel around and introduce people to citizen science online, in person, and hybrid events all month long. So big thank you to them. But yeah, my name is Caroline. I'm an advisor at SciStarter. But first and foremost, I'm a citizen science enthusiast, so I do this myself. I personally really enjoy getting out there, turning my curiosity about the world into real scientific impact. And I kind of volunteered my way into a job in a lot of ways with SciStarter. So I think it's always good to start off with what citizen science is. So it's by a few different aliases, and there are more academic debates about what the terminology should be. But on a functional level at SciStarter, we work with people who call it citizen science. We work with people who call it community science. We work with people who call it neighborhood science. We work with people who call it public participation in scientific research. Our main concern is that we just want to work with people who are doing real science and making it accessible to everyone. So what is citizen science? One way to think about it is it's a collaboration between scientists and those of us who are curious, concerned, and motivated to make a difference. So what does this mean? Typically, through citizen science, you're volunteering your time, and you might be any age. I've worked with Girl Scouts to retirees, and you can be anywhere in the world. There are even citizen scientists in Antarctica, for example. Every continent, there are ways you can get involved in science as a volunteer. And what does it mean to get involved in science? Typically, it's by collecting or analyzing data, and data is just information. Data can be words and pictures. Data can be numerical measurements like inches of rainfall or temperature. And by collecting and analyzing this data, you yield some sort of insight about the world. And that's the beauty of science. It allows us to answer questions that we all want the answers to. And with citizen science, maybe you're really into astronomy. You can monitor light pollution in the night sky as a citizen scientist. Or maybe you love birds and butterflies. You can document them on iNaturalist and help scientists monitor their population. And the project I'm talking about today, I See Change, it's a big part of my life. I do that one a lot. That's a project where anyone and everyone can turn into a climate reporter. So some citizen science projects are just at universities, right? Maybe they have research questions and they put it out there. And it's a principal investigator at a university analyzing that data that the citizen scientists submit. Sometimes citizen science projects come out of nonprofits. Like one good example is Stall Catchers. That's a collaboration between a university and a nonprofit, the Human Computation Institute, to have people play an online game to analyze data related to Alzheimer's disease to speed up the search for a cure. Our different nonprofits like the Nature Conservancy and places like that, Audubon, they have citizen science projects where you study the environment. Sometimes citizen science projects are just community members who design their own protocols, put in the legwork, do the work. I See Change is the project I'm going to be really spotlighting today. I like that one because it has collaborations with governments, but also has from the ground up stuff where you can just organize your fellow citizens in the community, your fellow friends and neighbors who are living in the community to collect this data around some sort of topic and have some sort of research insight. But first, what is SciStarter? So we defined citizen science. We talked a little about a few examples. We talked about collecting or analyzing data. SciStarter is that bridge. SciStarter connects you to the real science you can do, and it connects researchers to the volunteer communities they need to do their important work. There are over 2,000 projects and tools listed on SciStarter for you to discover. And this resource is available for anybody. Like I said, projects in all the different continents, every type of scientific discipline. If there's a science or something, there's a way you can get involved as a citizen scientist, and SciStarter is the place to go to do that. So Citizen Science Month that's going on right now runs through April. It's like the Super Bowl meets Christmas for citizen science. We've been doing stuff every single day. So that's a big reason why I'm here, and so I'm so honored that Todd asked me to be here. If you go to citizensciencemonth.org, you can find opportunities that ASU and NLM, all of us, SciStarter, and other partners have made available for you. So I wanted to plug that. But most importantly with Citizen Science Month, I think, are our featured projects. So SciStarter.org/NLM, if you want to go ahead and get ahead of me, you can go here right now and you can start participating, because I'm going to ask all of you to participate in I See Change during this presentation. So if you want to go ahead and go to SciStarter.org/NLM, I put it in the chat, and you want to click that I See Change icon and start participating, you can. You can skip ahead, full permission. But if you don't want to skip ahead, I'm just going to briefly explain what I See Change is. So it's a community engagement and data platform to help cities combat climate change. And I sourced these slides. It's incomplete. She did a much longer presentation, but I grabbed some slides from my friend Claudia, who works as a program manager at I See Change. She very kindly let me borrow them for this presentation. So I See Change is a citizen science project. It's a platform, and it connects people to their changing environments to make solutions together. And the reason I like I See Change is it's very accessible because anyone can look around and describe what they see. And typically, so it's really relevant in Florida. So where I live in Florida, I can look outside and I can see sunny day flooding, right? Water bubbling up because of sea level rise. I can take a picture of it, describe what I see, and submit it to I See Change. And I See Change, they also want you to give the human impact of whatever you're seeing. So maybe there's some sunny day flooding. I'm really worried because my neighbors are on the older side. I don't know how they're going to cope with this infrastructure. They want me to give that qualitative impression, that those words and pictures, my own assessment, the qualitative data, and they pair it with quantitative data from their partners like NASA and NOAA to get a complete picture of what's going on with climate change. And I See Change has partnerships with a number of different cities, but if you're seeing climate impacts related to extreme heat or drought or flooding or whatever it is in your community, you can just start monitoring it yourself, and you get your friends and neighbors to do it to have some real benefits for different projects. So these are just some examples of climate impacts you can monitor, and that people are monitoring in Florida and other places with I See Change. You can monitor flooding, you can monitor heat, and you can monitor pollution if you'd like. With heat, I think part of the value of monitoring at I See Change is it also functions as a community learning space. So they have moderators on there. So like if you are describing the impact of extreme heat on you, and a good example of a good IC change post is contextualizing it with your own local expertise. So let's say it's a really, really hot day and it's February. You can say it's unseasonably hot, and I'm experiencing cool, pale, clammy skin. Moderators and IC change, and you also can flag this as unusual, a climate impact. The moderators and IC change will get in touch with you and tell you about some actions you can take to stay safe. And if you have enough of your community members post about it, you can create a public education project based on that. And urban heat has been monitored in Miami-Dade County, which I think is pretty cool. And I like IC change too. Once again, that flexibility where you could use sensors if you want, or you can just have people describe their own lived experience. And an example of bottom-up community action is, so let's say there is extreme heat in your community, and you've noticed a bunch of people are posting the IC change, they're flagging this, you're seeing certain hot spots. An example from New Orleans is people are planting trees in response to that. They have a lot of different benefits. They absorb stormwater, they beautify the neighborhood, but they also help with extreme heat. That's a verified research result. So that's an example of bottom-up community action that you could do in response to the shared understanding created by data provided by IC change. So once again, it's the qualitative data that you offer to IC change that complements that quantitative data. So coping with extreme heat, they really just want to know what happened to you. So I think Michael's post here is really good. He said, I can only stand 2 hours working outside today. My intake of coconut water kept me feeling hydrated. They want the human impact of climate change. And you don't have to do a picture if you don't want to. When I ask you all to participate in IC change later on in this presentation, you can contribute a picture if you want, or you could just describe what you're seeing, general trends in your community. That's a valuable post too. Once again, flooding is something people can monitor. This is an example of flooding in a neighborhood in Miami. Someone takes a picture, describes what's going on. And pollution and dumping, another example. I mean, there are other projects that are just related to plastic pollution, like Marine Debris Tracker, for example. That's a really popular citizen science project you can find in SciStarter. But with IC change, you can post about pollution in relation to climate impacts. Or you could just post the pollution and see how pollution interacts with high temperatures, for example, in terms of lived impact. I think the beauty of citizen science for data is when we have this data-driven understanding about what's going on the ground, because climate change is hyper-local. How I experience climate change may be different than my friends across town. Maybe my neighborhood has more trees. I'm less likely to get heat stroke when we start experiencing extreme heat and other climate impacts like it. So when we have IC change and projects like it, we're able to get that street by street, neighborhood by neighborhood understanding of climate impact, and that data-driven understanding can empower us to act for resiliency. So another example of a bottom-up solution is in New Orleans, which is a big hub for IC change. A lot of people participate there. People are posting about their hurricane stories, how they've experienced hurricanes, how they've reacted to it. So people can learn together, and IC change can create a data story about it. So I think this data-driven understanding given by citizen science is the first step toward a better world and toward reacting to climate change. So my challenge for you all now, I know we're about to go on break, is I want you all to download the app. You can go to scistarter.org/NLM to get step-by-step instructions if you need those. I know I went a little fast, and you can click on the IC Change icon, or you can go directly to icchange.org. But I encourage you to go to SciStarter first, because IC Change is a SciStarter affiliate. And if you create your IC Change account with the same email address you used to create your SciStarter account, everything tracks in your dashboard, and you can keep track of different citizen science projects. It's really fun. But anyway, I'll put the NLM link in the chat again, so folks can go straight to it and get those step-by-step instructions for IC Change. Just click on the icon. You can download the app, or you can just post on the web app. Just select your location, describe your experience. You can monitor whatever climate hazard you'd like. Provide a picture if you want, or I know we're only giving you the break to contribute for this first contribution. So you can also just say generally what's happening with climate and weather in your community. What have you observed? What's your own take? What's your own local expertise? You can add some measurable data. You can say what you're monitoring. Maybe seasonal change has been a little odd. You can select that if you'd like. And then you just post your sighting, add as much data as possible, and you can view what others are doing too. This is Katie. She posted about, her experience in Medford, Massachusetts. Or you could see what people have been posting in your area for some peer learning. So Claudia knows a lot more about IC change than I do, so I wanted to include her email there in case people have questions. But otherwise, I'm going to pause here. I know y'all are going on break, so go to scistarter.org/NLM, click on IC change, go contribute, and when you get back, I'm going to go to the main IC change feed and see what people have posted. Todd, anything else before we go on break?
No, I think that's great. There was one question about what are, there are some non-climate things. So let's say you're interested, and the example was, local streets, helping your streets, make sure that your streets are in good condition and things like that. During the break, definitely go to a citizen science or a SciStarter rather, and you'll see there's all sorts of really remarkable projects, not just on climate change. I think this one is a really good one because it gives you a sense of what is possible, even if this isn't the most, even if this isn't what you're particularly interested in. It gives you an example of how this can work. Carolyn, anything else?
Yeah, I mean, if you're interested in streets, I think Project Sidewalk's a really good project. Like you said, Todd, there's you can go to SciStarter and find the citizen science project that really resonates with you. The IC Change is a great example because it's such a flexible platform and people can kind of organize themselves on it. So like, let's say like I'm really concerned about extreme heat in my community. I could ask my friends and neighbors to monitor that for, a few months. Maybe I ask people to post 3 times a week. And then at the end of that, I'll have a really cool data-driven result. And I can figure out like, okay, like maybe we need trees in this area, or maybe we all need to organize over here because my friends on this side of town are reporting worse impacts than my friends on the other side. Like I think IC Change is a really exemplary example of a platform that you can use for various other, organizing data stories, things like that. And at a minimum, you could just do it for yourself to monitor, like for your own self-study, how you're experiencing climate change over a period of time. The more data, the better.
Yeah. And then for those who are bird watchers, you probably are familiar with eBird. Bird watchers put in data to eBird, and now they have millions of pieces of data that has allowed them to use that and do scientific research on bird migratory patterns and figure out how to protect wildlife habitat using that data. So it's really a remarkable opportunity, again, to engage people directly and not just through NGOs. So with that, let's take about a 5-minute break. We will come back just after the top of the hour, give people an opportunity to get something to eat or drink, and then we will see you in a few minutes. All right, welcome back. We want to get going and keep going, and want to make sure we get done on time. I don't know if people had an opportunity to check out IC Change or SciStarter. If you did, that's great, and we'll check it, and we can share some of those later. If not, please do. I actually have gone to SciStarter, and they have a little program where they teach you sort of to how to analyze and go through some of the citizen science projects, one of which is on Alzheimer's, which is really interesting. And I think will give you a sense of how powerful citizen science can be. And then there's another great site for citizen science called Zooniverse, where they have a number of different programs where you can actually contribute from your computer. One of my favorites is called Galaxy Zoo, which is one of the ones that started it, because they have all this data about different types of galaxies, but not very much information about them because there are literally millions of them. And you can actually go in and look at galaxies that very few people have ever seen. So it's really it's remarkable a resource. And with that, I would like to turn to Sarah. Sarah is the founder. Sarah is going to talk to us a little bit about sort of how the technology tools that are available. So now we've talked about some of the ways to use it and some of the reasons to use it. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the technology tools that are available to engage in these things. And so I'll just do a quick introduction of Sarah. She works with Microsoft and builds global scalable Internet of Things solutions with Azure, specializes in process architecture. I don't know what that is. Data solutions, I do know what that is. But notably, she is the founder of Project 15 from Microsoft, an anti-poaching effort that derives its name. Well, she'll actually talk about where the name Project 15 comes. And she also was the innovator of Project Edison, which she won the Microsoft Polaris Award. And if you go to her discussion of Project 15, there's this quote, which I think encapsulates what we're trying to do here today. She says, "You never know where an idea will come from. You never know where it will take you. Project 15, if you follow the way back, starts with my cat Thomas and me rescuing her from a burning building. That moment in time led to Project Edison, which led to Project 15. Great things start from small events." And
You
so
never
that's
know. I mean,
that's
there might
our
be some people in here today that, all these butterfly effect of your life landed you in this room at this moment, and here we are. If I can figure out how to share my screen, this is always the funnest part, right? But thank you so much, Todd. I'm so excited to be here. Todd and I became connected through his work and then, of course, my work with Project 15. And, maybe that's a shared story with a lot of people in this room as you did Journey. So I wanted to share the story of, what is Project 15 and how did we get here? And then what we did with it and how, where you can gain access to some of the tools that we put out there. So you should be able to see my screen. I will assume that you can, unless somebody comes on and says you can't.
we can.
All right. I talk to a lot of technologists. I come from the commercial space. I will explain what a process architect is. A process architect is somebody who knows how to talk to business, business decision makers, people who are experts, and to model what their process is so that systems can be made to automate, augment. I didn't know a lot about medical device systems, but I went and talked to people, learned about it, and was able to work with them to design systems. So that's what a process architect is, and a data architect. So I do start my talks, especially to my community, to remind everybody that during the time you spent here today, and you saw those big charts, but if you bring it down to a micro level, we will lose 8 elephants on estimation during the 2 hours you spend here today with all of us. We will lose 24 pangolins. And 11 hours from now, we will lose another rhino. So the longer it takes for us to figure out solutions to help, this problem just keeps escalating. So welcome to Project 15 from Microsoft, a project that I started in my spare time and cycles. I don't actually do any conservation work from where I sit at Microsoft, you know, because my day job, you'll look at my LinkedIn, if you connect to me, you'll find a lot about mainframes right now. But I'm Sarah Maston. My day job is working at Microsoft. But I've built a lot of databases in the world that some of your data might have flown through. I did a lot of work with IBM when I was there. I did a data warehouse for Lycos, which housed all the old web pages for Tripod and AngelFire. So if you're of a certain age, that probably had your high school club web page. I was the data architect for Boston Medical Center, Monster.com, did their data warehouse, huge project, Couchsurfing, etc. So I tell you those things to really set the stage that I don't know anything about conservation besides being a concerned citizen up until about 4 years ago. And like Todd mentioned, Project 15 starts with my cat. This was Thomas. Her full name was Thomas, who is a girl. And she looks mad because this is the day after we had a huge fire happen in my apartment complex in Redmond. But what happened was there was smoke, but no bells. And I ran in and I got my cat and ran back out. And then the bells went on and it was very, very stressful. And I went, hung out with the building manager the next day, kind of freaking out. And he said, that fire was nowhere near where your part of the building is. The fire folks had put a fan, it was in a dumpster. And so, oh, ha, 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 no worries. And I just said, are you kidding me? I became a little famous in my apartment building because if I got upset, I'd go build a huge scalable platform about it. So I launched something called Project Edison, which could design systems for safety that could de-escalate emergencies for those of us sitting within an emergency. If you think about a big campus or something happens, you could be very, very safe where you are. But with all the notifications and everybody, blowing up your phone, you just get so stressed and it's hard to make good decisions. And so the POC to get it funded at work was a light bulb. And if something's happening, but you're not in immediate danger, it's yellow. And you could wear a wrist, something on your wrist that could go off because, as we know, some of our colleagues can't see the light bulb. So it's important to make everything accessible. And if it's closer to you, we have lots of stuff like this, fire alarms, etc. So if it's closer to you, it turns red, you get the signal and you leave. And that project, got picked up. We built it with a partner, and I was put on a global tour to talk about IoT and Microsoft and all of our technology and etc. Right, very standard stuff. But in around April, at the same time that Project Edison wound up being deployed through a partner in a very big school district, I was super proud of this. So proud that they won the IDC Smart Buildings award for it. I mean, just incredible, just an incredible honor if you're in my side of the industry. I was introduced to Eric Dinerstein. And Eric Dinerstein, if you don't know him, is a very, very, almost like a foundational conservationist in the world. I had no idea who he was because I don't come from that space. But he, as you can see, I put some of his accomplishments here. He helped create the conservation plans for the Galapagos, the Himalayas, the Panda Mountains, like everywhere, right? And he had a connected solution around camera traps. And a friend of mine said, hey, can you help my friend? He wants to figure out he has some scale issues. And that's what I do. I'm a scale architect. Sure, I'll talk to your friend. Eric, interestingly enough, this is some history. He put the first radio collar on a rhino to monitor her. She's okay. She's just sedated. And he started telling me about the problem. And that's where I learned that we lose one elephant every 15 minutes. And this is TrailGuard. I put the link here and you can go learn about TrailGuard. It's pretty cool. But what happened was I said, well, we have so much stuff. Like, why are you trying to recreate this wheel? This sounds like the problem is that we just don't know each other. And this is actually the first, napkin drawing, if you will. I drew this to a friend of mine at the cafe after talking to Eric a little bit, because Eric became my mentor. And that was, it's an incredibly special situation, with books and here's where to learn conservation tech and here's what's going on. And so how is this different than any other use case for safety that I had just gotten, off of a tour talking about? So I'll tell you how it isn't in a minute, but this is the picture that leads us to today. Talk about butterfly effects. I launched Project 15. Microsoft doesn't generally put out things that have a project name on them. Really, I don't think. But there was a lot of support internally, because internally on the commercial side, everybody kind of just went, "Oh my God, what if we can help them?" And the theme of this project, if you watch the video, I think I put a link in the video. Todd shared some information earlier, but there's a video that really asks the question, what can you do that, take 15 minutes to think about what skills you can bring to the table, because you don't have to have a PhD in listening to elephants to be able to help somebody who does make a system that's better. And of course, we have so many examples of that we've already talked about today. Because the real premise here was, if I could take Project Edison and apply it to anti-poaching, what was the real difference between, shoplifting in a big store or a huge mall and shoplifting a pangolin? At the end of the day, the tech is pretty much the same. It's the use case that is different, and the variables. So we started this project. This webpage doesn't exist anymore, but we just put out a webpage and said, are you a scientist? Are you a tech partner? We'd like to meet you. And that was that. That went out in October officially. So I waited a few months. I was a little nervous, but Eric thought it was a great idea. And my chief environmental officer, Lucas, he came into the video we put out and he thought it was a great idea. So I was like, well, hopefully it'll be a good idea. The first phone call came. There's actually a second video for Project 15, so you'd learn more about them. But Zambezi Partners, which was a startup building systems, just IoT connected systems for conservation, they wanted help. My second phone call came shortly after from Sunam, who leads the Red Panda Network. Sunam won the Whitley Award, which I think took place yesterday, this year. But he's phenomenal. If you don't know about the Red Panda Network, their work is absolutely phenomenal. Check them out. My third phone call came from this organization, which I wasn't expecting. And more specifically, it was Yoko Watanabe, who is the global manager of the GEF Small Grants Program, which is implemented by the United Nations Development Program. And she had seen the video and essentially said, I look after I think it's about 26,000 NGO projects over the course of since this organization has been put together. And they had a sort of a scale problem. Can you help us? We'd like to be more effective. And I said, sure. Yes, I can certainly try. And it was me and my friend Daisuke who was really my co-founder of this project. And we just, sure, we'll help you. How can we help you? So they gave us 3 projects to study from. So now you have a scale problem. You have 2 people with a side project, and that is difficult. So I started taking notes, because now we had 5 engagements. And what is the process around why conservation projects have roadblocks? Why, what's going on here? So the first was the pit of financial despair. And this is what I named it, because you're using your grant money to pay for things that, a solution accelerator like Project Edison, which is what that was, you could just use that and not have to redevelop. No reinventing wheels, let's say. You just have to meet the right people that can help you. There was a catch-22 for those that are really, really deep in data and ML. Microsoft had an organization called AI for Earth. And while that organization was in, active existence, they gave grant funding for folks to do very data-centric projects on Azure with lots of open data sets or their own data sets. But just because you know how to do the data portion of a solution, there's many parts of a solution. So how do you move that model that you made with, your science and put it on a camera and update the camera so that it's using that new model? to detect, whatever it is you're detecting. And that plumbing is where, as an IoT architect, that was my day job at Microsoft, but for commercial solutions like retail and a lot of other, if you think about touchless solutions during COVID, that's where someone like me comes in and designs that plumbing. So that was a problem. They're missing the plumbing. Perhaps you're doing a design it yourself device. Maybe you printed an open source device and you're doing a proof of concept, but you don't know how to create that full cloud experience that would, be able to scale or maybe pitch for funding, et cetera. Maybe you don't have grant funding. Maybe you got beaten out by, bigger, more established people that are winning out on the grants or something. So, you consider yourself a small fish. It's very frustrating. And then showcase, maybe a big company used the solution as some sort of showcase at an event for ESG or something like that. And then maybe it just was spun down afterwards and kind of stalled. Or you don't know how to get to scale. Now there's a slide on the conservation or the commercial side of my world where it looks pretty much like this. These are the exact same roadblocks that, any sort of thing you see in the world may have had and needed help building. So that was really an aha moment for myself and for my colleague Daisuke. So what we did about this is not, we didn't have the bandwidth to go and, do this project or that project, but what could we do that could help scale folks who were, doing these kinds of projects that could go faster? So we designed what became known as the Project 15 open platform. This, for perspective, it took Daisuke, who is actually the inventor of the USB drive. You use things every day that this technologist had his hands on keys to make Windows plug and play, etc. It took him about 3.5 hours to write this. We estimate it probably saves hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of development costs, and that was our contribution to help anybody who was building these types of solutions, especially, on Azure. I think it's great if people are building things on AWS. But this is you just push a button and it spins up and it will give you 80%-ish of every solution that is connected uses the same 80% of stuff on Azure. And so, that's pretty easy for us. If you're a scientist, it made sense to us that you don't have to waste your time learning how to do IoT Hub or things you'd only set up once. You could really focus on that 10%, which was your solution. This is what it looks like if you're a little more technical. You can go check this out at, I put the link on here, but it's aka.ms project 15 code. Even if you're doing something at work with Azure that's commercial, this is available to you. You just, we tried to write very simple instructions. We've worked with the smartest people in the world, I think, and we just wanted to make it easy because doing this may not be a domain. And as technology has advanced and been able to be applied in conservation, we've seen some examples today, all those sensors, all those devices, this is how they connect, and it just becomes more and more complex to do this. And so this is how we could help. Recently, we've added low-code Power Platform to it, which low code is a movement in technology because we don't have enough developers in the commercial world for the amount of need there is to digitize things, to make apps, etc. So low code is for those that can't code Java, never wanted to, and it really helps enable. So we brought that into here so that the conservation community, if they need some help learning about that, they can do that too. Power Platform is multi-cloud, just so you know. So if your system's built, doing something on Google, you're doing something on AWS, Microsoft Power Platform can talk to it's a multi-cloud product. So just so you know. But what this is really, really about is the 3 Ps, public-private partnership. This project actually within a year I had the honor to get a phone call that it was going to be in the annual report for the UNDP. I didn't really even know what to say. We had really, really good success with it, working with Yoko and her team, as it continues to be a tool that her NGO, funded NGOs can use and learn from. I did a lot of talks like I'm doing today. I do them on my day off. This talk, I was invited to speak with the CEO of the Jeff and some others, just incredible folks talking about how do we partner together, and sort of pay for these solutions, et cetera, and how important it is to combine our skills to fight for this earth of ours. And we did hackathons. So this is kind of private partnership, private-public partnership, with friends of mine in the tech community got involved, joined Project 15, came up with some ideas. We just use whatever we can. There's been a more recent hackathon that was done with Seed Studio, and Wild Labs, and we just kind of get together and say, how can we help? And so this particular one was with Tim Van Dam at Smart Parks to build the smartest elephant tracker. And this has been moderately successful in terms of getting our developer community educated, up to speed, and being able to learn about some of the organizations that already been doing this. We just didn't know. Speaking at many, many events, this is a really interesting one. Endangered Rangers had lots of people in it. Robert Downey Jr. gave a bit with Eric Dinerstein about Trail Guard. If you have it, this is a great show. If you have time and you want to watch in the background, I just want to call it out. It was actually led by the Zambezi partners, who were one of the Project 15 ecosystem folks. I know I'm running short on time, so I will just go. We came up with something called the Project 15 Challenge. And so this is going to model what Wild Labs does, actually. But what we did is use the Microsoft Capstone program. So other people at Microsoft started saying, well, how can we make impact? And the idea was, can we match students? And maybe some of you are students. And so, this is an idea. Find an NGO and build your capstone projects around it. So we had a few examples of this, and they're all open source. They're out on the GitHub repo that I shared the link. I'll share it again at the end. You can use all this work. You can be inspired by it. So this was the Red Panda Network. It's a very manual process of collecting data and having some connected cameras. We had a student within 3 months with no experience to speak of in this area create a UI that could go on top of the Project 15 platform, and actually you started using smartphones that could automatically upload pictures. And all of this data, of course, it was mentioned, that's not where the animals were. This is also 3 years old, I think, so it's safe. This is my obligatory, very cute red panda. We had another case study, elephant listening project, with a class of night students for their masters in AI ML at Oxford. It was studying sound. Elephants speak in infrasound, which is way below what we can hear. And so if you're biologically you have an X chromosome or Y chromosome, you can only hear certain ranges. What happened is that for the history of counting elephants this way, they could only do it's one elephant or two or more. And we had a group of students that, basically broke out of that and was able to apply something from a commercial project that they knew at work, apply it to this, and then out there on GitHub, you actually have technology that can count elephants. And they brought it into some open source tool that they use. I can't remember the name, but this was wildly successful. And all those projects are out there for anyone who's in these areas to be able to use. So for yourself, depending on where you are in your journey, where do I start? And I love it that Wild Labs keeps coming up. I know Todd collaborated on his book. And this is such an amazing organization. I've done a lot of talks with Stephanie recently. We've done impact summits, etc. It took me to go on that whole journey to make Project 15, to get into this, to discover, I almost felt like Christopher Columbus, that Wild Labs already was there. And so, whenever I give this talk these days, and for people who have no familiarity, with this space, I just say join Wild Labs. Like they're doing everything you will want to do, and be able to help connect those dots for you. And of course, if you're interested on doing those projects, of course, on Azure, it's my day off. So do those projects on whatever you're doing them on. We have to fix this place, and it is dire. But if this helps you in any way, feel free to go and explore that and use that. We put all of our Capstone library out there. We did an integration with a company called Edge Impulse, which is TinyML. And if that helps you, I am forever glad. So, but please don't. It's my day off. So whatever you're doing, please keep doing it. And so here's some links if you want to learn more about Project 15 or me, and please feel free to reach out and connect on LinkedIn. And that is Project 15.
That was fantastic. So I thank you, because I think one of the key questions for a lot of people is, okay, how do I get started? And I think the key message that you have is other people have already done a lot of this, and you don't need to start from ground zero. So you mentioned Wild Labs. If somebody, I noticed that your degree is in psychology, undergrad.
Yes.
Mine is in political science. And so neither of us started in a tech space. And so people like us think, well, I'm overwhelmed. But obviously not. So you mentioned, like I said, you mentioned Wild Labs. Where can people who have social science degrees, not tech degrees, where would you direct them to start?
Well, there's Wild Labs, and then there's also when you do your follow-up email, going out to the small grants website. All those projects are public. You can go and search, Yoko and her team. And then within different countries, they work in 127 countries, I believe. And these use cases go from, biodiversity to land management to chemicals to waste. Like you could be I guess a chemical engineer, and, maybe you're looking for an NGO somewhere that might want some help, or you found something at Wild Labs and it applies, or something you're doing. That's a great place. You can just search, like, I'm interested in the pangolin. And you see, I gave a talk with a very, very nerdy, awesome YouTuber named Alex Glow, and she did it in real time. She's like, so I could just search on my passion animal. I go, yeah, try it out. So that's a great place to start. Depending on what, technology stack you are most familiar with, you can go to that source and say, what's going on over here? I know there's stuff. I just gave a talk, and Dan Morris is over at the Google Cloud. So I know there's stuff that goes on over there. I know there's stuff going on everywhere. It sometimes becomes a question of, how do I filter to just kind of focus on something? And I think that's a bigger challenge than how can I help? It starts with citizen developer. I downloaded the Bird app and I'm able to help. That's one way to help, right? In the app we just learned about. The second level is to say, you know what? I'm really good at Excel. I'm really good at UI development, whatever it is. I'm a policy person that's interested in getting involved or learning if I can do data analysis to help. Wild Labs is probably the easiest place to go. And then someone in the community there is going to definitely be just like you, I would guess, and be able to help craft, a journey with you. And they also have so many talks and open hours, and, they bring folks like myself, they bring folks, like Dan Morris. He was actually the creator of AI for Earth at Microsoft, just for those that don't know. And you can just go and talk to them. It doesn't hurt to ask. The worst anybody ever can say is no for any idea you have. So don't be afraid to ask. And any of us will just, oh yeah, go over here. Off you go.
And I can tell you from firsthand experience, if you ask people to do something on a Saturday, they will say yes. So there's always people are remarkably helpful in this. If you have questions, please go ahead and put them in Q&A and chat. We have a couple of questions. One, somebody just said, are we going to receive an email with attached the websites? Yes, we will also have the PowerPoint presentations and the other information, and then some additional resources that our speakers have offered. So, like Sarah just said, you will probably be more overwhelmed with information than you can deal with. But yes, thank you for asking that and pointing that out. Somebody also asked about the project 15, about the 15 minutes. Is that 15 minutes? Is that poaching? Is that death of all causes? What is that?
I do not have that is the number I was made aware of by Eric Dinerstein, who is one of the world's experts on these. So I don't have the right number of letters behind my name to know that exactly, but with some digging, I'm sure you would find out the source of that, whether it's human wildlife conflict. That is a huge problem. There's also elephants in India, and other places besides. That's one thing I've noticed is there's a big focus, of course, on the keystone species. And maybe you're wondering, why are they called keystone species? Um, Here's an example. There's a guy whose name is Ralph Chami, and he is out of the IMF, and he's done a lot of work on nature capital. So if you're somebody who's interested in that kind of growing sense of what is an elephant worth alive versus on the market, dead. An elephant is so valuable because they are the only animal on Earth that can eat a certain kind of fruit because of its size. And then when they eat the fruit, they, they poop the seeds. And when they poop the seeds, they grow another tree. And so if you take down an elephant, you are actually taking down the tree. And within the tree, a lot of birds and bugs and everything else lives. So that's really the problem. I challenge you to start thinking about it in a way of how, a very much how does this affect that kind of way? Because the more you dig into this, you'll find something you're definitely really passionate about, and then you can apply your skills and find out where to do that. And maybe there's a commercial job doing that for, who knows? But it all starts with one step.
Well, thank you very much. That was really informative, and I think it's given, like I said, given people a lot of opportunities to figure out where to start on some of these things. So thank you so much, Sarah. I appreciate it. In our schedule right now, I have a break, but I am going to forego that break because I think we just had one, and I'm sure people on their Saturday want to enjoy their Saturday. And one of the questions that we got was talking about conflicts between wildlife and humans, and how do you, there is a sense that sometimes if you protect wildlife or you take environmental actions, that there is a trade-off, that it is harming humans. And that trade-off can be very difficult, which is why I'm super excited to have our next speaker, because what David talks about is how to align financial incentives, financial benefit, prosperity with helping the environment. And that's what excites me about conservation technology. As somebody who works in government regulation, who has worked for government agencies, I certainly see the value of those sorts of things, but I also see the trade-offs. And conservation technology in this approach can help overcome some of those trade-offs. And it is a way where it isn't just humans versus the environment. It can be humans and the environment. So let me introduce David. He is the head of carbon. I have been accused of having a head of carbon. He is the head of carbon at DevStream, which is a technology-based company that advances the development and monetization of environmental assets with an initial focus on carbon markets. I first became introduced to David when he was CEO and co-founder of Green Lines Technology, which is a really clever approach to reducing CO2 emissions, but by helping people get to where they want to go, transportation, more effectively. Again, combining personal incentives with environmental benefit. And I will just say personally that David is one of those people who, every time I talk with him, I spend the next 2 hours thinking about what we have discussed, because he has lots of innovative ideas. And I'm excited to have him give our third presentation about how to align financial incentives with the environment and how to fund some of these projects. So David, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks, Todd. And thank you, everyone. So I just wanted to, I am conscious that I'm the last speaker here for the day, so I'm going to try to make it light and easy. And obviously, if there's any questions, please post it or ask after the few slides we have here. But just wanted to share my screen first and hopefully take you through a journey of how do we pay for all of this that we've been talking about. So as Todd was saying, DevStreams is a company that's focused on carbon streaming. So we work on with people that develop cool, innovative technologies and solutions to decarbonize the world. And when we say decarbonize, we just not only in the greenhouse gas emissions and reducing those emissions, but also other environmental benefits. So just wanted to take you through just a quick introduction of the company. Obviously, these are the pillars we focus on as a company. The technology is a strong focus of us. Make sure that everything we do is transparent. Everything that our partners do is transparent, so we can actually report back to society and shareholders and so forth. The scalability is critical. We're going to do something. We should focus on things that can be scaled. If tiny pilots, tiny projects are interesting, but our focus as a company is on things that can be scaled, preferably globally. The fourth pillar is the data intensive. So we focus on projects that are very much based on data. If we can get reliable data, we should, in our opinion, we should not spend a lot of time. Otherwise, we don't really know where the money is actually going for. Transformative means that, in our view, is we have to focus on things that will make an absolute change in society. We change the way we do things, whether it's as a person, as a companies, or as obviously governments. And the last but not least is the impact needs to be immediate. If we invest or we work on projects that's going to take 10 years to get there, sorry guys, but it's going to be too late. So we need to focus on things that will have an impact tomorrow, not in a 10 years time frame. There's many other people that's working on the long-term view and long-term solutions. That's great, but this is not our focus. So the main theme for, I think, everything we do here with DevStream is that for the longest time, if you think about, as capitalism, sustainability and capitalism has been on a collision course. If you want to be making a lot of money, you need to be doing things that generally are not aligned with the environment. So our focus is basically aligning those two efforts, like being, doing well and doing good at the same time, but with the caveat of doing that at scale. Like I said, we want to make sure that we invest and we put effort on things that can be scaled quickly and fast and have a big impact. So to do that, we focus on three main elements here that interact, and that where they interact is where we work on. Obviously, we focus on environmental issues, right? We apply technology, we focus on getting data, and we focus on systems that can be collecting and processing that data. But then we need to focus on the technology, on the capital and projects that actually have an ROI. And that's a thing where we think we see a lot of potential for opportunities for people that are doing amazing things, but they miss on how do we pay for those solutions, right? There's public money, there's grants, there's obviously crowdsourcing, things like that. But how about we bring Wall Street into this discussion? And if we can convince Wall Street to invest in these projects, in these solutions, that's where we align capitalism with environmental responsibility, which is exactly what we're trying to do here. So that's our focus. So these presentations are all about that. So I'm going to give you a few examples of things we do, how we do things, and obviously some of the examples of people doing really cool things out there. But before we do that, I want to explain or talk about the environmental benefits. A lot of people talk about that, but a lot of people don't realize what they are, how do you go about it, and how do you actually create a financial instrument. So here are a few examples of environmental benefits that exist. Reduction of GHGs, reduction of plastic waste, water efficiencies, noise reduction, and the list goes on and on and on. There's also social benefits, by the way. I'm not going to speak about that, but the importance here is that we are trying to create the jump from the benefit, the environmental benefit, to a financial instrument. And these boxes in blue here that you see are financial instruments. What it means is that a financial instrument can be traded in a marketplace. There's a market where people buy and sell those financial instruments. And the linkage between the instrument and the environmental benefits is that if you buy an offset credit, for example, it represents a reduction of or a removal of 1 metric ton of CO2 emissions from the atmosphere. The renewable energy certificates is another example of a financial instrument linked to the reduction of GHGs, which is linked to 1 megawatt hours of renewable power delivered to the grid. Water credits, by the way, I love the example of e-water at the beginning of this conference that we were talking, because these guys generate water efficiencies. Obviously, they generate a really cool environmental benefit. The interesting thing is that transforming that into a water credit, which is a financial instrument to finance that capital expense. So that's a very important aspect of this discussion, understanding the jump from I'm doing the right thing to actually creating an instrument that we can actually finance that good thing that's happening out there. So I'm going to focus on the carbon markets here. And just to clarify the compliance versus voluntary, there's a lot of discussions here. Simplistically view is that compliance markets are run by governments, voluntary markets are run by NGOs or other organizations, but generally not governments. But just wanted to clarify this as a starting point for the few slides that we have here. So you might have seen this graphics from McKinsey. It's basically showing the where we are today all the way to 2020, excuse me, and where we need to be by 2030 and 2050 if we want to meet our carbon decarbonization goals under the Paris Agreement. So you can see that we are now at about 42 gigatons of emissions globally. And this is where we need to be by 2030. We need to be by, basically below 20. And by 2030, we need to be about 5. So that's a minus 23 gigatons by 2030. And this is the removals plus 2, so 25 gigatons. So if you look at this picture, it looks bleak. It looks hard to reach, right? So when in our world, in the environmental financial instruments, I see this as reductions, the top part, the removals, the bottom part. And when you look at 2030, the best estimates are we're looking at basically half of the reductions will come from either regulations, operational efficiencies from organizations that doing things more efficiently, as well as carbon taxes. There's some reduction that will be achieved thanks to the incentive of taxing people with carbon taxes or taxing organizations. But that leaves the other half to carbon markets or carbon market mechanism that will incentivize companies and organizations and people to do the right thing. So just to touch on the compliance versus voluntary, these numbers are absolutely gigantic if you look at the numbers today, because where we were in 2020 is that the voluntary markets generated about 100 million tons of credits in 2020. We're looking at 3.2 billion in demand side by 2030, in 7 years from now. And that basically requires a massive investment in decarbonization activities that right now we don't have. So that's where innovation comes in, technology. We need to actually invest. Why? Because this is numbers that we got from Technician from 2022. Apparently in the US, there's like 44,000 climate tech firms, so basically startups. You can see the breakdown here by what they do and where they focus on. There's a big chunk of energy, farming and food production, circular economy, mobility, and so forth. But what's interesting is that from our view, what we see is that there's a lot of people, the vast majority of people actually, over 99% of these companies focus on the revenue from their product or services sales. So if they're going to pitch their business plan to VCs or angel investors or the grant money, they're going to focus on here is what we can do to actually produce revenue. And that's focused on primarily on their products and services. Let's say if you are a technology company that develops a product that reduces energy consumption, for example, what you're selling to the VCs is, you're going to reduce a lot of emissions by a lot of, energy consumption, so a lot of savings of those. What we found is that less than about 200 companies in the US, out of those 44,000, actually focus on the revenue from the environmental benefits. So they're completely missing the opportunity to quantify and transform those environmental benefits into an actual financial instrument to generate revenue and to pay for this as a revenue source for the companies. So this is a very shocking picture to me, because there's thousands and thousands of companies that have a blind spot right now. They're not considering a revenue line that they should definitely do or at least consider. But I just wanted to, this is the picture that looks bad. And now let's look at the picture that looks amazing, which is this is something I actually spent about 10 years of my life in the power generation sector. So if you are one of the people that work in the renewable power in the world, you work on solar or wind farms or geothermal or hydro, you must be very familiar with this. Probably you're going to be very familiar with this, which is basically environmental benefits and financial instruments linked to those environmental benefits are very, very, very common on the power generation sector. And this is two stats to prove that point. There's over 2,000 wind farm offset projects right now registered under the CDM program from the United Nations, producing credits, offset credits. Over 2,000 wind farms. It's very, very common. That's not an issue. And I don't know if you're familiar with the renewable energy certificates, RECs in the US. That's projected to be a $26 billion market by 2030. Right now, it's I think $17 billion a year. So this is very common in that the power generation sector. So how can we convert or transform that, obvious business case here into other sectors of the economy? So here's a couple of examples of companies that we actually partner with. This is a company called Prosper. They focus on wastewater treatment technology. They have a very unique and obviously proprietary technology to reduce energy consumption from wastewater treatment plants by 85%. So when you look at the whole picture globally, you look at the 1 to 3% of the global energy consumed comes from wastewater treatment facilities. It's a gigantic number. And when you look at specifically to cities, about 14% of the city's energy budget goes to those facilities. So if you can reduce by 85%, but with one technology that you apply to those facilities, you can have a gigantic impact, not just on the savings of kilowatt hours per dollar per kilowatt hour, which is obvious impact of that technology, but also on the environmental financial instrument that you can generate as a consequence of that technology. And so you can see here at the bottom, the percentages roughly that we're looking at when we're looking at the business case of implementing that technology. 60 to 80% is energy savings, dollar per kilowatt hours, but a 20 to 40% is coming from credit revenue. So this is obviously not going to cover 100% of the technology cost of implementing that capital expense, but it covers a significant portion of it. So for this company, obviously, this is something that it's a kind of a no-brainer to consider using. So that's why we partner with them. This is one example. The other is a completely different one. It's called TS Nano. It's a company from the US, and they basically have developed this it's a university project that turned into a company. And they have basically have a sealant, which is a nano sealant that generates basically a complete plugging of the methane that's being released by in this case, oil wells that have been abandoned or orphanated. So just to give you some numbers here, obviously, if you're not familiar with this, methane produces about 20x times worse global warming potential than CO2. There's over 3.2 million abandoned oil wells in the US. This is a shocking number. In Canada, I think we are over 300,000. And so the focus here is obviously in what's called the super emitters, so which is the ones that produce more than 100 tons of CO2 emissions, 100 tons of methane emissions per year. So if you do the math with a really conservative price of per credit of those emission reductions avoidance, you're looking at over $1 million in revenue just with the credits. So the credit generation out of that activity can pay for the plugging of those oil wells. So if you're familiar with this plugging oil wells in the world, if you Google it, you will see a lot of news about governments and institutions worldwide trying to figure out how to pay for this. Well, this is a really good way to actually pay for it. So this is another example. And I just wanted to show two more examples. We don't have any affiliation with these two companies, but I think they're so great that it's worth mentioning, especially on the forestry and agriculture sectors. So starting with the one on the right, Veritree is a company actually based here in Vancouver, where I'm from. And they basically provide the technology to verify the environmental claims that people do when they say, I'm going to be planting trees. So they have a really cool technology to actually demonstrate that. So that's solving a very important problem, which is the credibility of claims, environmental claims. The other is the soil information. It basically provides real-time, auditable accuracy data for soil measurements, which is one of the biggest issues in the agriculture space when it comes to soil sequestration. So these companies are developing this technology to actually give that real-time data that actually provides, the assurance that if somebody's going to buy a financial instrument called a carbon credit or similar environmental credits, they have the assurance that those credits are quantified properly, that there's an auditability linked to it. Just wanted to leave you with a couple of more slides here. One is if you look at the whole picture of the total emissions globally, this number we talked about before, 42 gigatons of CO2 emissions. This is the breakdown by sector. A lot of people seems to focus on the obvious ones, the industry, not many in the transportation, by the way, a lot of people in the fuels, and there's a lot of in the livestock, manure, agriculture, soils. Cement gets a lot of attention from the press. But I would just want to point to one example that nobody seems to be focusing on, which is the crop burning. 44% of the global emissions are coming from crop burning, usually in places like Indonesia, Southeast Asia. There's no, at least I haven't been able to find any technology companies actually focusing on solving that problem. And that's a bigger problem than cement production. So just to give you an example, there's many others that you can see here in the list. But the point here is that we need to go from 42 to 23 by 2030 in 7 years if we are to meet our climate goals. So we need to put a lot of capital behind innovation that we have right now around the world, including the US and Canada, to actually meet those targets. So basically, one thing that we keep insisting as a company is that we have a really strong belief that the technologies that we need to meet our climate goals exist today. We don't need to reinvent or invent new things to actually get there, which is a theme that seems to be coming back again and again from a lot of places. We think we have a strong belief that the technologies that exist, we can actually just need to scale them up. And for that, we need capital to go into those technologies and those companies, right? So that's why we focus on the environmental benefits and financial instruments linked to that. And obviously, our belief is that those financial instruments are linked to a transitional phase from here where we are to where we need to be in the 2050s. That's where the financial, environmental, or climate finance needs to play a big role. Hopefully by 2050, if we got there, we are at 5 gigatons globally. Then obviously climate finance is not necessary. We think we are going to be already past that threshold. And with that, I think I went hopefully fast enough, but I have a few more slides and questions, obviously, if anybody has questions.
Yeah, so if people have questions, go ahead and add them. Like I said, the reason I like this is because it aligns personal and financial incentives with environmental benefit. Too often those things are perceived as being at odds, and then they're not. I don't know if you said you had other slides or other pieces. One thing I wanted to ask you is if people are looking to innovate and for sources of funding for low level, for the very first startups, do you have recommendations about resources and where people can go?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of VCs focus on climate tech. That's the word that I would use when you look for, these VCs or angel investors or institutional investors focus on my stuff. Climate tech seems to be the theme of the name that people seem to use. But when you do the sales pitch, and this is where I think this is the key here, you're trying to sell your technology, your solution, your startup, right? This is you might do a gadget, you might do a software, you might do, I don't know, something, a project that you're engaging people from the ground up. That's great. But think about the environmental benefits that activity, that product generates. And what is if you can quantify and say, hey, per unit, this is the great example with e-water. If the example of this is the cost of per unit, and this is the revenue we can generate by selling water, great. But how about we generate environmental benefits and credits? How much more revenue we can actually bring into the equation? That's when you attract more interest from the VCs. So it's not just getting to the VCs, it's actually showing that the complete picture. It's like two pieces of the two sides of the same coin. you're missing the other side. You're not telling them that you actually can generate revenue from that side.
Yeah, I'll just add two more things real quickly, which is that, of course, crowdfunding sites. There are some famous products that have come out of just simply crowdfunding. One of them that I mentioned in my book is Seabin, which is two surfers who decided that they were tired of plastic in the water where they were surfing. So they went to, I can't remember which crowdfunding site, and raised money and built a little floating trash can, essentially, that removes trash out of the water. And it was all funded individually. Some people by, $5 a time. And then the other thing is that organizations like EPA and NOAA at the federal government in the United States have competitions where they have problems that they are trying to solve. And rather than just imposing a regulation, they want to say, look, is there technology that can solve this in a productive way? And so then they have competitions, and there are some really interesting competitions. EPA has one now about a very difficult problem about water called there's a chemical in the water called PFAS. And so that's another place that you can look to see where there's some opportunities. So we have a couple of questions. The first one, we sort of touched on earlier, but I'm interested in your answer, which is what kind of degrees are useful for innovation in this space?
Oh gosh, I get asked that question a lot, and to be honest, I don't think there's a degree yet out there that meets the demand that we have in this sector. I would say the most closer one is the environmental engineer. That's typically the people that's coming from the technical side. But the thing about this is a lot more complex than just purely environmental science and environmental engineering. We're looking at legal. If there's any lawyers focused on this, there's a huge career on this. The legal ownership of the environmental assets is going to be a big debate in the future. Who owns what and how those relationships occur between not just citizens, but also citizens and companies, employers and governments. That's going to be a big debate. Financiers are completely, most of the, I would say like more than 90% easily, are completely misunderstanding what the potential of this industry looks like in the future. So I think if there's anybody on the finance side, this is a huge potential opportunity career for the next 20 to 30 years. I would say legal, finance, technology, obviously, that's no-brainer. Science. And maybe one more would be the stakeholder consultation, like public consultation and stakeholder consultation. Finding tools that engage population, that collects data, it's completely one of the blind spots of this industry. We're still doing things with pieces of paper, right, where we actually go and do surveys, and this is not scalable. If we want to implement a large-scale environmental projects worldwide, we need to have an ability to collect data fast and scalable. Those tools do not exist, and there's a few examples out there that people are doing that. But that's another area that I think people coming out of the degree with public consultation expertise, which I don't know what the title looks like, but that could be a potential opportunity here in this industry.
Yeah, that's great. I think it indicates that there's a role for basically all expertise and specialties. Georgia Tech, I know, University is actually developing a program on conservation technology. So you're starting to see this at the college and universities training to do these exact things. The next question we have is, what role do you see nuclear energy playing in the future energy mix? And is there a way to incentivize nuclear development using this with carbon credits or other things like that? So I don't know what your thoughts are about that.
I'll defer to what the Paris Agreement points to, and the scientific community is basically the same. From an environmental greenhouse gas emission standpoint, nuclear is very green. We all know that the side effects are not that green. Of course, they have a lot of issues. So there's a lot of debate whether like the province of Ontario is trying to push the credits from nuclear power. We need to see what the demand on the market looks like before we can actually make an assessment. Because yes, from a GHG standpoint, yes, they reduce. If you reduce the demand for coal or other natural gas and things like that, but we need to price and put a weight on the potential side effects of that technology. I don't think the scientific community has gone to that point yet, but that's something that needs to be decided in the next few years. We want to get there.
So we have one last question, and it says that the 7 years window, which I think you referred to in one of your charts about reducing CO2 emissions, is difficult. It says it feels like it's hard to make a difference in that short amount of time and encourage a large number of others who are less concerned about climate change and the risk. And I'll answer briefly, and then I'll ask you what your thoughts are. This is the reason actually I like we brought on David, and why I like to focus on the financial and other personal benefits of this. Having worked in government, if our focus is constantly on government regulation and getting government rules, we're very unlikely to solve a lot of environmental problems because they become political. Gallup rates the climate change as the one of the most divisive issues in American politics, and I'm sure it's divisive elsewhere as well. And in that environment, if your strategy is to rely on hoping that your party stays in power the whole time, it's very unlikely. You're going to be frustrated. So we need alternatives to engage all people so that you're not telling people you must agree with me on the seriousness of climate change or the seriousness of other environmental issues in order to play a role. We need to give people lots of reasons and lots of incentives to play a role, and technology and finance, like David is pointing out here, I think can play that role to engage everybody on their own terms rather than forcing them to agree to our terms. I don't know if you have anything else, David, on that.
No, I think it's what's interesting is the environmental finance or environmental markets is something that both sides of the political spectrum agree on. We see this every day. I'm based in Vancouver, BC. It's a left-leaning party here in British Columbia. We have the next province, Alberta. It's a right-leaning party. Both parties agree that environmental markets is the way to go for completely different reasons, but they both agree. They both have a carbon offset program that in place, and they're promoting and expanding and improving. So I don't think it's a political issue when it comes to actually making an impact if we can make money out of it. That's when both parties agree or both sides politically agree. But more than anything, I think we need to focus on people. Just to give you some numbers, every person in the US or Canada, we produce about 15 or 16 tons of CO2 emissions per year per capita. So our collective average is 15 or 16 in US and Canada. So what if I told everyone around, said that if you reduce 1 ton of emissions of your per capita number, I'm going to give you $1,000. I bet there will be a lot of people actually finding a way to actually make that happen. Going vegan, biking to work, finding any way they can. Well, there's actually ways. Maybe there's not $1,000 per ton. But right now there's RECs are priced between 40, 50 US and $250 US, depending on where you are. That's linked to 1 megawatt hour of renewable energy. So if you put solar panels on your roof and you are in some states like West Virginia, your impact is gigantic. So obviously, as a person, individual, it's hard to actually collect a 1 REC from your roof, but you can aggregate multiple people. So those are incentives that exist. So I think we need to start thinking about how do we actually link this capital expense or capital financing tool to everything we do to reduce our footprint. If we do that, then there's a chance that we're going to get there by 2030. If we don't put all the tools that we have in the tool shed in place, then there's no way to get there. I mean, regulations can't go as fast.
We do have a few more questions, so if you're willing to stay a few more minutes, I want to get through these because they're good questions. One of them is, are the carbon calculations based on natural greenhouse gas production or just anthropogenic?
It's anthropogenic, yes. It's only human cost, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So 42 gigatons, that's a big number.
Yeah. We have another one that says, when you talk about scalability, how do you take into account the differentiation of the effects of climate change on individual ecosystems and the needs of different communities?
Oh, that's a very wide. I think I'm going to go back to the per capita. There's environmental situation where we have no control of. For example, people in Alberta has the oil patch where they push their per capita emissions much higher than the average in Canada because of where they sit, where they live. There's nothing to do with their lifestyle. It's where they sit. Same thing happens with Qatar. It has 40 tons per capita, not because the people in Qatar drives SUVs, all of them, and pollute much more than the average American, but because they're oil producing country. So if you're sitting in a country where there's the deforestation, your carbon budget or per capita is going to be worse than the one that does not have that problem. So I think we need to all push our governments to do their part as well, not just us as individuals trying to do the right thing, but push for governments to impose regulations, obviously drive decarbonization as a whole, not just with us as individuals, because there's a point where there's nothing you can do as an individual much more than what the environment pushes you.
So we'll do one last question. It says that to promote large-scale solar, how can carbon credits play into financing these projects? I think they already are to some extent.
You mean solar?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so solar depends on where you are. In the US, carbon credits are not usually linked to solar. I think there's only one project in the US that actually produces carbon credits. Solar in the US is linked to RECs. Solar RECs are sold in different jurisdictions in the US and Canada, depending on there's a lot of kind of different regulations and programs in place. But if you Google RECs, solar RECs, you'll see the prices, you'll see the different markets. There's 7 or 8 markets right now in the US. But if you sit elsewhere in the world, you have 2 avenues. One is IRECs, international RECs, which are quite recent. They started like a few years ago, or the traditional offset credits. Offset credits have been producing from solar plants and solar farms for decades, so it's nothing new. The question here is, I think it's where we have not made the mental shift, is moving from a solar farm to distributed, home-based solar facilities, like with your house with solar panels on top. And I haven't seen any aggregation of those types of facilities into one project and producing credits or RECs.
Yeah, and a REC, just to remind people, is essentially what's called a renewable energy credit. It is basically just 1 megawatt hour of renewable energy put on the grid, and people will pay extra. So for instance, Amazon and others, Microsoft, will specifically say that they want renewable energy and they will pay a little bit extra. So rather than getting the value of the carbon, they will get the value of the renewable energy. So it functions in a similar way, just a slightly different calculation.
Yeah, I think it's important just to clarify. If you're Microsoft, you're a company that's trying to do, source all the electricity you have or you need from renewable power, you could, invest in a wind farm next door if you can, solar farm or geothermal, things like that, or you can buy RECs from somebody that's actually implementing that facility somewhere in the US. That's usually connected to your grid. That would be the ideal. That's why the RECs exist. That's the logic behind those.
Yeah, and in my people are skeptical about renewable energy sometimes, but RECs actually, like voluntary purchases of RECs, people who are willing to pay more, I think that's great, right? I think I prefer that to a regulatory approach, because a regulatory approach, when you say, okay, we have to meet these certain targets, the costs are spread across everybody, whether they can afford it, whether they can't. Voluntary purchase of RECs, I think, is a way to achieve some of those things without using the regulations. So
yeah, I'll give you another example, Todd. Here in Canada, the government of Canada launched last year what it's called the Clean Fuel Regulations, the CFR. And CFR will allow the creation of credits linked to low carbon fuels. There's a CI, a carbon intensity of fuels. Anything below can generate credits. Anything above has to pay a penalty or buy credits. So basically, the idea is to lower that CI over time. So the government is pushing that CI down over time, which is great. The price of those credits is going to start trading in July this year. It's going to be 300 Canadian to $350 Canadian per credit. It's a gigantic number. So there's an absolute rush to actually go and produce those low carbon fuels right now in Canada. So that's a good voluntary carrot that the government is putting ahead of the organizations to say, hey, if you do the right thing, we're going to help you actually pay some of it by issuing credits. So it's just another example of an environmental asset.
Well, thank you so much. That was fantastic. And thank you to all of our speakers. Again, what the purpose, the thing that I really like about working in the small technology area in the Conservation Technology 101 is that it empowers anybody to take action. So often what I have seen in government is because the assumption is that only government can do some of these things, that people wait, or they decide that their only route is to lobby members of Congress or legislature, things like that. What we're seeing with these technologies is the opportunity to take action individually and do so in a way that is productive, not only to help the environment, but also is financially beneficial, takes advantage of the disposable income and the interest that people have to take action in a voluntary way. And so thank you very much. Like I said, we will be following up this with emails, with a list of resources, a page that has the PowerPoints for more information. We hope this has whetted your appetite for more and to find out, to think more about how to use conservation technology to solve environmental problems. And of course, if you have follow-up questions, please reach out to us at the Washington Policy Center. We're more than happy to connect you with people that we know. Some good resources that have been mentioned today, like Wild Labs. I want to thank again our sponsor, DevStream, for helping put this on, and the other organizations. So with that, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us on a Saturday, and we look forward to hearing from you in the future.